Welcome to the Road to Accountable AI. I'm Kevin Werbach, Professor of Legal Studies and Business Ethics at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. For decades, I've studied emerging technologies from broadband to blockchain. Today, artificial intelligence promises to transform our world. But AI won't reach its potential without accountability, mechanisms to ensure it's deployed in responsible, safe, and trustworthy ways. On this podcast, I speak with the experts leading the charge for accountable AI. Olivia Gambelin is a deep expert in the practice of AI ethics. Among other things, she's the founder and CEO of Ethical Intelligence, one of the leading advisory firms in the area, and the author of the book, Responsible AI, Implement an Ethical Approach in Your Organization. She has a unique perspective as someone who splits her time between ground zero of the global tech industry in San Francisco and ground zero of global tech regulation in Brussels. Our conversation touched on the different approaches to responsible or ethical AI, the reasons why companies should take action, and the tools that she uses to help organizations on their AI ethics journey. Olivia, welcome to the Road to Accountable AI.
Thank you so much for having me here, Kevin.
What first attracted you to the AI ethics field?
I would say it was probably a couple different factors, but at the core of it, I'm just really fascinated by ethics and morality. You know, everyone in life has different lens they see the world through, or they try and interpret the world through. For me, for whatever reason, ethics has been that lens that I'm trying to understand how people interact with each other, what we do in life, what drives us. So at the root of it all, it was really my love of ethics. And then AI just provides such an interesting, almost mirror back towards us. So perfect place for someone interested in ethics to really sink their teeth into.
Yeah, that's interesting. So talk more about what it is about AI that you think makes it particularly interesting for someone who focuses on ethics.
Well, I would say one of the main reasons that AI is such an interesting, almost like playground, I want to say, when it comes to ethics is the fact that we are, in a way, trying to mimic or emulate our own ethics and morality, our own human behaviors. So when it comes to the kind of decision making that we're putting into, say, neural nets and so on, that is in at certain levels, and yes, there are deviations, but it is an echo of our own humanity and our own human nature. And so what it's doing for us is it's highlighting these really fascinating ethical challenges, really, that we as humans have been dealing with for thousands and thousands of years. And it's bringing it into like a new lens. We're seeing it from a new angle where we're almost removed from the equation and we can see how our actions play out and our decisions play out. And then be able to go from there and say, well, how do we actually reverse engineer this down to the roots, which is us as people? And understand, well, how can we make better decisions? How can we let's say fine tune our understanding of ethics and morality?
So if there are these hard ethical challenges that we've dealt with for a long time and these scenarios where the right answer is not necessarily obvious, how does that translate to a company saying, okay, I'm going to deploy this system and I've got to make a choice about how I design it? How can that lead you to actually giving constructive advice?
Yes, that actually ends up as, I would say, one of the first mental blockers to companies engaging with ethics, because they can come at it at this standpoint, this perspective of, well, if there are so many challenges and so many, well, it depends kind of answers, how can we actually create concrete action and practice to be able to apply to our solutions? And so what I like to point out here is it is the practice of going through and figuring out, well, where could this go wrong? That we then get to start to pinpoint, well, here, it can go wrong here. And we can actually put in safeguards for if and when that does happen. It also enables us really to truly predict in what ways that we need to innovate, honestly, in AI to be able to counterbalance some of those ethical challenges, or to understand where some of those shortcomings are going to lie, where AI, for example, shouldn't be applied. And instead, we still need the human decision making factor in place. So it's less ethics is really, when it comes to practicing in AI, it's less about having these concrete black and white decisions. And it's more being able to predict very, very forward facing, but that predictive problem solving and being able to retroactively fix some holes that have been there for a while.
Yeah. So when do companies typically contact you? Is it they're starting down the path of deploying an AI system, or they're trying to have a broad framework, or something has gone wrong, or they're worried something in particular is going to go wrong?
So AI ethics and responsible AI is a really rich field, and there's a lot of us that have different niches. My niche specifically is at the very beginning. So there are a lot of ethicists that will work on the development cycles. They'll be hand in hand with engineers. I sit more with executive and leadership teams and sometimes even design teams because my focus is on how do we develop a strategy, a responsible AI strategy for putting good practices in place from the start that's going to enable ethical decision making and enable best practices in AI. But then also on that design side, I'm really sitting with the teams and the strategy of, well, how do we actually I have my specialty of ethics by design. I find it fascinating. So how do we actually design for ethical values from the very start? This is me. So I tend to work with companies that are more proactive, that are looking to use the responsible AI and ethics lens really as a competitive edge, but that also understand that this is long term where the market's going to go. So they're getting out ahead of their competitors. I know, for example, though, I have a lot of ethicists and fellow colleagues that are brought in retrospectively when something's gone wrong and they need to fix it. But I tend to sit on where do we start and answering that question of what am I missing?
What's the first thing that a company needs to do?
Whew. Well, as a classic ethicist, I'm going to say it depends because it always depends on the company. But from my perspective, one of the first things a company needs to do is take stock of what they already have in place. So I will actually, I'm about to launch, and I guess when this podcast is out, this will already be out, but it's something called the Values Canvas. And it is, if you've ever seen the business model canvas, it's basically a sheet of paper or a whole one document, and it gives you this map of what am I missing? What do I need to see? What do I actually need in place? And this values canvas, it goes over the people, process, and technology layers that go into developing AI and using AI responsibly. So, from my perspective, and I'm a little bit biased here, that's actually a great place for companies to start because what it does is it empowers them. They're saying, oh, this isn't the wild west of I need ethics question mark. What does that mean? It's very practical of this, these are the solutions. These are the operational mechanisms and the protocols that we need in place to be able to even enable engaging with any ethics decision making. So for me, starting with that values canvas, which also actually intrinsically implies as well knowing your values.
So you mentioned the values canvas. I assume that's part of your new book on responsible AI. So tell us a little bit more, just more broadly about what you focus on in the book.
So the book, it's out in June 2024. I'm very excited. It's Responsible AI, Implement an Ethical Approach in Your Organization. And it's really, really written for leadership and the next executives in artificial intelligence who want to take responsible AI seriously. What this means is the book is designed to take you from A to Z in developing responsible AI strategy. In the book, I don't offer, say, specific solutions in terms of technical solutions. Instead, I sit on a few layers above it, looking at that full picture view of, well, what do I actually need in place? Who is responsible for responsible AI? What are our first steps? What goes into a full holistic strategy? And really, as well, how do I conceptualize ethics and how do I find my values that need to go into our practice? So it covers a lot of these different pieces. It's a thick book, but it really is well, it really will be a great starting point for executives to get their foot in the door when it comes to responsible AI.
Uh, How in the book do you make the case for why companies and executives should invest in this?
So that is actually my favorite chapter. It's chapter 5 of the book, and I was feeling particularly sassy when I went to write that chapter. And I basically had reached the point I was tired of constantly singing the same song, let's say. Like there are very, very clear benefits to responsible AI, such as talent acquisition, reduced costs in terms of development, reduced failure rate, increase in brand equity, so on and so on. But this is the song that I'd been singing for so long and that a lot of others in my field have been singing. And so I sat down to write that chapter and I thought, I don't want to write that again. I've said it before. I give it in my talks. It's been done. I'm kind of tired of getting these objections. And so I said, well, let me actually map those objections. So I wrote down all of the different reasons that people usually tell me why they're not investing in responsible AI. And I broke those down into 5 categories. And so that the title of that chapter is actually 5 reasons why not to invest in responsible AI, and 1 reason why you should. I can't, in good conscience, just tell you why not to. But really, what I did with those objections is I sat there and I said, okay, let's break these down. Let's actually put them in context and look at the logic behind them. Are they well founded, or is this something more just a fear that's sitting behind it? And, it covered everything from, well, responsible AI takes time. Yes, it does. Responsible AI costs money. You have to invest into this. This is not something that you pull a framework off the internet and say you're good to go. It does take time. It can be confusing when it comes to external communications. You're at risk for ethics washing. And I really validated all of these pieces. But then at the same time, I put it in the context of AI and I compared it to companies' investment in AI. And it comes down to the fact where, as you were reading within the contextualization of these points, it was like, well, actually, these are just good business practices. Why wouldn't I actually uh, invest in this space? One of the biggest ones actually that stands out to me is responsible AI costs money. Yes. Well, when you look at investments in artificial intelligence, either in adoption or the build of it, the failure rate risk of any AI investment sits between 83 to 92%. That's insane. For the amount of money that gets invested into an AI system that will most likely fail, those are huge costs. And companies will invest thousands, if not millions of dollars into solutions that will reduce that failure risk rate by even 1% to 2%, because that margin of failure rate reduction is huge in terms of cost saving. Responsible AI, thanks to a study done by BCG and MIT, is actually proven to reduce that risk of failure rate, bit of a tongue tire, by 28%. That's unheard of, the savings on that. So when you contextualize the cost that it takes up front to put responsible AI practices into place, they are tenfold counteracted by the amount of savings that you get when it comes to reducing that failure rate in terms of AI investment.
So the responsible AI practice will actually improve the effectiveness of the AI itself.
Completely.
How does that happen?
Well, at the end of the day, responsible AI is basically just good business practice. It focuses on standardizing your data practices. It focuses on standardizing your documentation of your AI models. These are components that should have existed from the start, but are actually some of the biggest blockers to companies when they start to try and even scale AI in-house. They haven't put these good practices in place. Other aspects of it include training. Your people need to know what they're doing or how they're doing it. They need to have these operational frameworks. So when you look at it from this perspective, all I'm really regurgitating here are good business practices, good development and business practices. It's just through a specific lens of being able to translate values into action. But that's really, at the end of the day, responsible AI is a good business practice. These are going to be standard practices in the future.
But they're not yet.
Not yet, exactly, which is always surprising to people. I think the biggest one is especially around that documentation case is there is a lack of standardized documentation when models are developed. So one person can develop the model, leave the company, and it could be a company of, thousands of people, and no one knows what that model does or how it works because the documentation isn't there. That should be a no-brainer that the documentation's there, but it's not. This technology was developed kind of in the Wild West. Now we're putting in best practices and standards.
Is the biggest challenge just the willingness and understanding of companies that they need to document, or is it that there aren't formalized standards or templates for that?
I would say at the start, there weren't formalized templates. Now there are immense amount of online resources to at least get you started and examples of companies. So even when you're looking at documentation around your data, NVIDIA has put out these amazing model cards. You can quite literally go online and find these model cards and start using them today. They're a great example of standard documentation processes. The challenge was when we first started deploying AI and companies started first engaging in building AI systems, this was before any of those standards existed. So it really was the Wild West. And there is this pressure of we have to develop faster, we have to go faster. And when you're going faster and faster and faster, documentation is one of the first things to get taken off the list. 'Cause you're like, I'll go back and do it later. It doesn't really matter. So in that combined effect of that pressure to move fast and break things and the lack of standards to start, or the lack of formal templates to start, was really one of the major challenges at first.
What else has changed in the years that you've been doing this work as we've moved into this period of time where there's now just an immense amount of excitement and discussion about AI?
Well, I've been at this for a while. I would call myself a veteran of the space, which still sounds funny because it's a new space and I still feel new to it. But, 7 years in, I guess I've been around. Well, when I first started out, a lot of what I was doing was truly, honestly building awareness. I would say I'm an AI ethicist. I would give that introduction, and people would look at me like I had a third arm or something. What in the world is an ethicist? What do you do? So a lot of my work early on was just trying to explain this is what ethics is, and this is what it is in the context of AI. Now, over the years, we've had actually some key points in time that have changed that narrative and changed the application. So early days, it was a lot of this is what ethics is. And even back then, I was really trying to get my mind around what are the solutions. It did feel like a Wild West, even for an ethicist. What are the practices? Where does a company start? It was a lot of conversation, a lot of co-development and building and research in those early days. Then we hit COVID-19 and we had all of this COVID tech come out. And all of a sudden, the entire world was in a thought experiment around what it means to have technology developed from the start. And that brought AI ethics, responsible AI out from the shadows and into a main line of conversation. And then we started seeing some more standards developed, and we started seeing these policies and like, let's say, high level lists of values come out that we were able to start to see some patterns in and say, okay, we've got some basic standards set down. And then we had generative AI hit. And obviously, generative AI existed before ChatGPT, but ChatGPT was really the start of this boom. And now, at this point in time, companies have actually moved to we don't need to talk about this anymore. We actually really need to do it. And so, this has been an amazing point in time to be able to see the early stages and be here where it's now becoming a requirement. And now we're really getting these amazing case studies, seeing some really fascinating solutions come out. So it's been a journey, let's say, over the last years.
What are some of the best case studies you would point to, or examples if someone wants to say, here's an organization that's doing it right?
Well, I actually am about to release a great resource on this because, Kevin, I get asked this question all the time. And you can hunt for them. So, actually, one place that you can immediately look is the World Economic Forum did an entire case study on Salesforce. And that is a very in depth case study and a really brilliant one in terms of the intricacies there. What I'm doing is, along with the values canvas that I guess when this podcast comes out is published, I'm starting to create an archive of case studies. So I am about to start the release of a series of 9 different case studies of companies that do it well, and specifically on different fine-tuned solutions. This will make sense when you check out the values canvas. I've got 9 different types of solutions on it, hence the series of 9. But that is going to be a fantastic resource of companies that do it well. And then I'm opening it up as an archive. And the idea there is to have companies and individuals be able to submit, hey, this is what we've done in terms of this kind of solution, just to create that body of case studies, because this is a question I get asked all the time. And unless you hunt for them, they're far and few between right now. And it's hard to find that central database.
Can you generalize it all across the companies you see that are doing responsible AI well?
Absolutely. So the companies that I see it doing really well, either okay, this is on the larger end because of course we've got startups all the way to enter to Fortune 100 companies. And I would say in general, companies that do responsible AI well have two main factors. One is they understand that responsible AI is a holistic practice. They are not just looking at technical solutions. Their responsible AI initiatives do not just exist in their engineering or programming or developer departments. It exists across the entire organization. And that's really important. The people and the process behind the technology are just as important, if not have more impact at this point in time on the outcomes than, say, the actual technology. So companies that do it well understand that. They have a robust governance system going in. They have training going in. They are incentivizing their employees to engage with these practices. It's a holistic initiative. That's the first factor. The second factor is companies that do this well have a team. And this can look different depending on the company. Some companies will spread out their team and have people placed within different departments. Other companies will go for more of a centralized structure and have the team concentrated in one department. But the bottom line is someone is responsible. Someone's in there under the title of head of responsible AI, chief ethics officer, lead AI architect, and AI ethics architect, these kind of positions. Because what it does is it creates the budget and the gravitas and the credentials and resources that are needed internal. It's showing that commitment, and it's putting at least a mind or two on a very complex problem. This isn't something that you do at the end of the day or that you tack on to another person's job. It is really complex. You do need someone, the larger the company gets, you do need teams to handle this.
And conversely, other than not doing those things, what's the biggest mistake that you've seen companies make in this area?
Well, from the startup perspective, I know I'm a bit all over the place on up and down on the size scale, but from the startup perspective, and I'll see the sentiment carried as well into larger enterprise, is the sentiment, the kind of mistake where someone says, well, I'm an ethical person, therefore I'm fine. It's not a matter of whether or not you are ethical. It's not a matter of whether or not you're a good person and make good decisions. That is completely separate from actually applying ethics and working through responsible AI practices. That's actually a very important separation to make, because people can get very sensitive and nervous to engage in this topic of, well, I'm a bad person. That's not true at all. Your ethics and your ability to execute on ethics within a company structure are completely different. So if you have this kind of mental blocker of, I am a good person, therefore I don't have to worry, you are missing the fine tuning of this ethical decision making. You actually need to be able to surface those ethical decisions going into the company and going into the technology in order to be able to work with them. If you're not aware of the decisions that are going in, you are creating these biases you are embedding biases that you are not even aware of. And those biases can be for good, they can be for not so good. But you need to be aware of them and you need to be able to fine tune them. So I would say that's actually a huge blocker in terms of the cultural perspective of I'm an ethical person, therefore I don't need to do this. And the other one, again, is that mindset. Conversely, companies that do it well, it's a holistic solution. Companies that are stuck are ones that are saying, we're going to solve this in the code, and that's it. And we don't go beyond that.
Yeah, and that's an important point. And it's one of the things that I look at where, for example, we talk about algorithmic bias, and there are lots of these examples of systems that have racially biased effects or gender bias, and it's always a question. Well, is that what the company really intended, or did they just screw up, or is there just sort of some simple thing they didn't do? And of course, you're not necessarily going to be perfect with some of these systems. You can't be absolutely certain there will never be any bias. So how do you advise a company in terms of the right way to think about a challenge like that?
Yeah, I would actually say to look at the bigger picture and take into account the worst possible scenario. So let's say you do push into production a model that ends up having an extreme racial bias. What are your contingency plans? How do you then go back and fix it? What feedback loops do you have? This is actually something very important. Do you have tight enough feedback loops where you can actually catch that problem early on? Because if you have the feedback loops early on where you're actually in communication with the people that are being affected by the model or the people that are using it, who can give you that live feedback of saying, hey, there's something off here. We feel like that there is a bias here. You can catch it before it becomes a bigger problem. So it's less about trying to completely eliminate bias. That's impossible. And it's more of what are you doing outside of that? How do you get the feedback in? And then if something goes wrong, how do you then go back and fix it? How do you then communicate externally? You have the steps afterwards and assuming the worst, but hoping for the best, of course.
Absolutely. That goes back to what you said before. It sounds like that's also just good business about having mechanisms to monitor and have oversight of things in deployment.
Yeah, exactly. When you say it like that, sounds like a very simple thing to do.
Sounds good when you say it too. So absolutely. What about the maturity of the community that you're in, the community that's doing AI ethics or responsible AI? I know, one thing that you've done is created an association for people in the field. How far along are we in terms of the development of sophistication and standard practices and so forth for AI ethicists and responsible AI practitioners?
Yeah, that's actually a great thing to bring up. So, Kevin, actually, at the start of this year, we launched something called the EI Network, which you are an amazing member of. But we have the EI Network, and that really came from this sentiment of I do a lot of professional speaking, and I end up at a lot of people's events. And I have tons of people coming up to me saying, "Oh, you're the first ethicist," I also work in responsible AI. I don't know anyone else who ever talks about this." And so while I was having these individuals coming up saying, "Oh my goodness, I'm so excited to find you. There's someone like me. There's someone that does a similar job to me." I was sitting on the other end going, "You're the 10th person that's told me that today. What in the world's going on here? We need a place for us to all come together." And so that's ended up spurring the start of the EI network, which is this growing global community of responsible AI and ethics practitioners. The community itself, both in the EI network and beyond the responsible AI space, is really a diverse group. We're coming from all different angles. We're coming from all different specialties. So I say, I'm an AI ethicist. My focus is on ethics. I come from a traditional ethics training background versus I have colleagues that come from engineering backgrounds. They're more on the technologist side. I have colleagues that are lawyers by background. I have colleagues that are designers by background. It's this holistic picture and people coming from all these different angles, which makes it honestly really, really fascinating space to be a part of because of the interdisciplinary nature of it. You have to have these cross communications. And so you meet a lot of people that I will lovingly call very quirky in terms of interest, because when you're working in responsible AI, we have a lot of different interests. We're pulling insights from different fields. We're not just siloed in one. We actually have to have that communication throughout the different fields and perspectives that go into building AI. So it makes for a very rich tapestry, let's say, of a community.
Given that interdisciplinarity, though, should a company that's thinking about hiring someone, should they ask themselves, do we want someone from an ethics background or someone from an engineering background, or is that not the right way to think about it?
That's actually a great way to think about it. And it requires the company to really understand what their need is in the first place, which is a different challenge. If the company doesn't understand first and foremost, hey, we need someone that's going to be in with our engineers and working on the actual product, or hey, we need someone more from a business analyst background that will help us design the business models, or we need an actual ethicist that's going to be able to research and give guidance on key decision making. If the company doesn't understand that yet, I would say the best place to start is with someone that comes from more of a strategy background to be able to build out that entire initiative. There are different specialties and they are very different specialties. For example, I do not code myself, and it is something that has never stood in my way. So the people that are listening that want to work in this field, you don't have to code and you can still have a very great career in this space. Um,
Especially with generative AI now, it'll write the code for you.
Exactly. But, at the end of the day, I'm not going to take up projects that require me to be working on the actual, development and code of these systems. I have colleagues that I work very closely with that I have a good rapport built up to be able to execute on that kind of communication.
How do you think that the work that you and the others in this community do is going to be influenced as we now have significant amounts of legislation and regulation like the European AI Act that are going to come into force, putting obligations on companies in this area?
Well, there's definitely going to be a huge amount of us working on compliance and regulation for sure. But I think this is also something to really highlight here is we're going to start to see a huge difference in terms of companies that are just going for compliance versus companies that are going for responsible AI. The compliance and the regulation is, think of it as like the foundation for the house. That is your bare minimum. That's your baseline. It's very important to be compliant. I am not dismissing that at all. It is very important. Those are regulations for a reason. But that is not the full story. You can be perfectly compliant and still very unethical. Responsible AI and ethics is the house that's built off of those foundations. So when it comes to working in this space, we're going to see a lot of people working on audits in the future. We're going to see a lot of people working on compliance and risk mitigation factors. But then we're going to see also this beautiful, what is my favorite part to this space, but this beautiful side to it where people are working more on that strategy and that design and looking at ethics by design and looking at getting these responsible AI practices in place so that compliance actually becomes, I think it's like 10 times easier at that point to be able to comply with these incoming regulations. So it is going to impact our space. I think the biggest way that it will impact our space is, or at least in the close future, is the need for people like me in this space to really be able to stress and to highlight the difference between regulation, compliance, and practicing ethics and responsible AI. We're really going to have to make that clear.
And last question, what do you see going forward as the biggest challenge that you face in the work that you do?
Whew, that is actually a great question. I think right now, on a personal level, my biggest challenge is be having enough hours in the day. I think if I had 48-hour long days, that would be perfect. For me, my not necessarily challenge, but my next area that I'm diving into is further down the rabbit hole of ethics by design. But I'm specifically looking at, instead of looking at the causes of ethical outcomes in design features, I want to look at actually how people experience these ethical values and how people experience, say, for example, users experience privacy or fairness. And then how do we then reverse engineer that into looking at what design features need to be put in place for that? So flipping things on their head, instead of looking at the cause for these experiences of ethical values, I want to look at the effects and see how do we reach those effects that we're going for, and expanding too beyond privacy and fairness and looking more at some human values like empathy and trust and loyalty in those. So I wouldn't say that's a challenge in terms of what the big mountains are to climb, but it's definitely the space that I think is the time is now and is opening up, and I'm really fascinated in digging in deeper there.
Really look forward to seeing what you come up with. Olivia, thanks so much for the conversation.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
This has been The Road to Accountable AI. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a good review and check out my Substack for more insights on AI accountability. Thank you for listening.